excited to be joined this morning by one of our great partners over at Lever News, David Sirota, founder of that great outlet, who has a bunch of new exciting projects to talk to us about. And David, I was saying to you, I was so excited to see that at a time when a lot of news organizations are struggling and having to lay off staff, that you all are actually expanding, which I think is a real testament to the need that you serve and the unique reporting that you all have done on, frankly, compared to the giant corporate media outlets, a fraction of the budget. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And what I'm really excited about is we've been able to hire journalists to do the digging, the investigations that we do. I think we're losing a lot of journalists right now, and I know people have some criticism of the media industry generally, which I share that criticism. I think one thing I'm most worried about is the loss of people employed to actually report and surface original information. So that's what we're investing in.
Yeah, well, we've really relied on, your work. We've relied on it with regard just recently to the Baltimore Bridge collapse and the machinations to try to limit liability for this giant shipping company. I know you all are relaunching the Lever Time podcast, and you're taking a look at what has been very perplexing to a lot of the media class, which is why, in spite of the fact that there is low unemployment and high stock market and some other sort of macroeconomic indicators that are positive for Joe Biden, his economic numbers continue to be so poor. We actually have a little bit of a trailer for the relaunch of that podcast. Let's take a listen.
I think that the more rough and tumble, the more debate, the more vigorous exchange, the more you are battle testing your party, the more you are battle testing your ultimate general election nominee for that battle with the Republicans. And I look back to 2008.
You talked about Ronald Reagan being a transformative political leader. I did not mention his name.
Your husband did.
Well, I'm here. He's not.
Okay, well, I can't tell who I'm running against sometimes.
Yeah, that primary was vicious. I feel like people don't remember just how tense things got between the Clinton and Obama teams. Like, if you read accounts from back then, you see just how much vitriol there was between both of them, and personally, too.
Absolutely. And the same thing with the 1992 primary. I mean, that was a brutal primary between Bill Clinton and Mario Cuomo was potentially going to run, and Jerry Brown. I don't think those primaries weakened those general election nominees. I think they battle tested those general election nominees. And I think those general election nominees came out stronger and better and more suited to win the general election. But honestly, I feel like that view is in the minority of the Democratic Party.
So bold stance there in favor of actual democracy. And it ties in with the economic conversation, because I think anyone who's tried to understand, okay, well, why do Americans still have legitimate upset around the state of the economy at this point has been met with this sort of derision of like, oh, well, what, do you just want Donald Trump to get reelected again?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this perfectly bad storm for the Democrats in this way, that they've suppressed a primary, which means that they've suppressed a debate, a discussion about, for instance, economic issues. And the White House has gotten comfortable just saying, hey, listen, these are your choices, take it or leave it. We don't have to actually use a primary process to sharpen our message. So in other words, Biden hasn't, in not having a primary, hasn't faced the kinds of questions in a day-to-day basis that he will face in the general election, for instance, about the economy. So there's been a year or two of the White House just sort of trying to flip it off. But those questions about the economy aren't going away. Now, you said, you're right, the macroeconomic data is decent. And look, the country would be in worse shape if the macroeconomic data was worse. But that doesn't mean people's day-to-day lived economic experience is particularly good. And Biden, up until very recently, I don't think, hasn't really had a really sharp message to say to voters, to address those concerns to voters. And those are real concerns.
Yeah, instead, a lot of the approach has been, at least from the sort of like Biden supporters and spokespeople, has been to gaslight or to tell you, your experience isn't real. You're just being tricked by media coverage that's negative of the economy. So, what are some of the pain points that you have been able to identify that are real and are contributing, at least, to the fact that many Americans are not happy with the Biden economic record, in spite of the fact that some of the things he's done, I think, are a really positive step forward economically. Labor and antitrust really stand out to me. We covered with Emily on Counterpoints, covered the new DOJ suit of Live Nation Ticketmaster. That direction is really promising, but doesn't necessarily impact Americans right now, today.
Well, look, there's two things going on. In the people's lived experience of the economy, there are things that are bearing down on them. Housing costs, the cost of money itself, interest rates, creating higher costs for auto loans, transportation, and the like. Grocery prices have, up until recently, been going up. So these are real pain points, basically pain points on the necessities of life, right? Like food, housing, shelter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there is an argument to be made that no one president in the course of one term can solve all of those problems immediately, problems that were developed over multiple, basically, generations of neoliberal economic policies. So you have these pain points here that are real. I think the reason any incumbent gets blamed for that is because they're the incumbent. But I also think that the incumbent can do things to combat being blamed for that. Let's remember that Franklin Roosevelt ran for re-election in the middle of the Great Depression. Re-election in the middle of the Great Depression, right? He didn't run around saying, hey, listen, all you people are just, you're misled about how bad the economy is. The media is gaslighting you, right? He positioned himself instead as the sharp tip of the spear against the corporate forces that were creating that pain, as opposed to saying, hey, everything's getting better. So Biden has not really done that. He has not really positioned himself as the sharp tip of that spear. And I think, if we're being honest, part of it is a White House messaging problem. They haven't faced a primary that's prompted them to have to actually really engage day to day. But if we're also being honest, part of it, I think, is the fact that he's an 81-year-old guy. And it's hard to communicate a strong, tough economic leadership message as the sharp tip of the outrage at corporate forces bearing down on people. It's hard to do when you're as old as he is. It's not to run him down for being old. It's not to say it's his fault for being old. But I think almost inherent is that part of the job of being president is using the bully pulpit. And look, when you're 81 years old, it's probably harder to use the bully pulpit by virtue of the fact that you're an older person.
I think there's that, which I noted actually when these latest inflation numbers came out that were hotter than expected. And, people like you and me who have been talking about greedflation from the beginning and were initially dismissed as like fringe until it was kind of undeniable. And you've got these CEOs admitting on earnings calls, like, yeah, that's what we're doing. There was an opportunity there for him to come out and not try to downplay that, groceries cost more than they did last year and that that's significant for people, but to really call to task the corporate price gougers who are contributing to that state of affairs. But that would mean he was a completely different person with, frankly, a different ideology and a different level of vigor that he's able at this point to bring to the table.
I totally agree. And I think the sad part about this, among other things, is that I actually do think that the Biden administration has a story to tell. I think when you look at what's going on at the FTC, when you look at what's going on at DOJ antitrust, when you look what's going on at the NLRB, when you look further back to what happened with the American Rescue Plan. Now, granted, that expired, but the American Rescue Plan, a huge investment in the working class of this country. The Biden administration does have a story to tell. They just haven't told it very well. And you're never going to tell that story only through your FTC chairperson or only through your deputy or assistant attorney general for antitrust. The president has to be the one telling that story. And I don't think the story has been told. But I think there still is time here. And what I'm saying is that I think when you look at the State of the Union address that Biden just delivered, the themes of that State of the Union address, I do think were right on. He really was trying to position the administration as a counter to corporate power. Is it a little too late? I don't think it's exactly too late yet. Is it going to be enough? I don't know. Can he deliver that message in the noise of the general election? I'm not so sure. And will they actually sharpen the message enough where enough people will believe that they are really serious about being that challenge to corporate power? These are all the unanswered questions.
Yeah, and that's my last question for you, David, is how much are people even processing politics at this point about being about economics? Because they have this sense of like, well, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, things don't really change much for me personally. So I guess I should just vote on like who signals the right way in the culture war or how I feel about Donald Trump, which I don't want to dismiss those things as illegitimate, by the way. I mean, I think the looming threat of Trump is real and it is legitimate to be concerned about that. But how much has economics just sort of vanished from the landscape of what people even expect politicians to deliver at this point?
Well, this is the part now you're really getting to my personal pain point, because it's the thing that I get depressed and demoralized about. That it feels like, at least right now, we're in an ahistorical moment in this way. That in the past, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Used to be kind of the defining question of presidential elections, or as James Carville had put it, it's the economy, stupid. I'm not sure we're living in a society anymore where economics is considered salient and germane to elections and how we pick presidents, which I think is actually a problem, right? To me, that should be the first and foremost question of what does this presidential election mean for the economic future and destiny of this country and the economic experience of people in their daily lives? I think that's the first and foremost thing that we actually do have the most control over as a country, right? Like the policies directly affect us here and now, economic policies. And if those policies aren't part of how we're making a decision in these elections, we're basically saying we can't change the economy. That both parties, all of the candidates, are just simply uninterested in making any kind of change that would benefit the majority of the population. I don't want to be in that place. I think that is in a sense, that is the democracy crisis. If we simply say economics is just not part of how we pick people, I don't want to believe that we're there. It would really be a break from history if we are there. But yes, it does feel like we now live in an era of vibe elections that are almost exclusively about the culture war and nothing about the class war.
David, where can people check out Lever Time?
You can find it at levernews.com. Just go right there. You'll find it right there.
All right. Great to see you, my friend, as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.